Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. Steve Ehlmann was elected St. Charles County Executive in November 2006. Prior to that, he served as the county's Director of Administration. Mr. Ehlmann's public service is unique in that he has been elected to serve in 3 branches of government. He served as a legislator in the Missouri House, 19th District from 89 to 93, in the Missouri Senate, 23rd District from 93 to 2001, and he served as an Associate Circuit Judge, 11th Judicial Circuit from 2001 to 2003, and he's serving as the County Executive since 2007. Mr. Ehlmann is an historian and currently serves on the Board of Trustees for both the Missouri Historical Society and the State Historical Society of Missouri. This is Steve Ehlmann's first visit to this program. Mr. County Executive, welcome to Conversation.
Glad to be here, Lee.
Well, we're glad to have you.
I get real nervous when you read that introduction. People are likely to think, what's the matter with this guy? He can't hold a job.
Yes. People look at politicians kind of, don't you get that lately? I mean, people kind of look at politicians, or at least people who describe themselves as politicians, or people who are in political positions, they kind of look at them like, I don't know about this guy, even though they don't even know who you are.
And some of that is deserved, but you know, politicians are just like every other profession. There's some very, very good people and some very, very bad people, and a lot of people in between.
Right.
And I used to like to say that in Jeff City, everybody's represented. The smart people are represented, the dumb people are represented, but sometimes the dumb people are overly represented.
It's heavily weighted that way. Are you an attorney also?
Yes.
Okay, because I was going to say you were a judge, but being a judge, I'm not sure that being an attorney is required, is it?
It is in Missouri.
It is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I know in the Supreme Court of the United States, it's not required.
No, it's probably not.
No.
But and we've had some Supreme Court justices who are not attorneys, but yes, in Missouri it is.
Mm-hmm. You like being county executive as opposed to the legislative or judicial roles?
I really love being a state senator. In Missouri, you know, we have 34 people in the Senate. It's a small group of people. You can get to know everybody very well, and you have a great deal of power because of the unlimited debate. Mm-hmm. But you also have a lot of pressure on you to work with your colleagues on their bills so that they'll work with you on theirs. And I really enjoyed being in the Senate. I just had a family at home, and my wife said, you need to get home here and help me raise these kids, and she was right. So I went from there to the judiciary. I found that I didn't like that much at all. You were just dealing with.
There 2 years?
I was there 2 years as an associate judge, 1 year as a circuit judge, and you do a lot of sentencing, and you basically deal with all the failures, either of individuals or of society, to make them more than what they turned out to be, and it was really actually pretty depressing. And,
how would you like to have been that Coleman judge?
I would not have liked that.
Yeah,
I would not have liked that.
That would have been. I guess that would be a really tough time being a judge, to be involved in that kind of a circus environment.
It is. Yeah.
Have you ever had a high-profile case like that?
No, I didn't. I was only there for 3 years, and only 1 year as a circuit judge.
Right.
Actually had a rather serious case that was going to come up about the time I was leaving, and I actually stayed an extra couple weeks to handle that case, but it settled at the last minute. Mm-hmm. So there's it's a tough job, and it's a challenging job, but it's a bit depressing. Mm-hmm. There's not a whole lot you can do to make things better. You can work with people, on probation and things like that a little bit, but eventually you just have to put them behind bars, and that wasn't something I really enjoyed doing.
Mm-hmm. I understand. Let me just say to the audience that we're taping this on May the 10th of 2011, and this will be shown sometime in June. So what we say today and then something might have changed. So I just put that out there as a caveat. Last week, there was a a little thing that I saw on Fox 2 News where Elliot Davis came to visit you in your role as county executive, and he had some questions about some money that was being spent, and I guess it was transportation money, and he asked you some questions about, is this the best use of this tax money? So I'm going to let you start the story from there, and you can start with background and then move on to the Elliot discussion.
Well, this was a grant that we received from the federal government, from the gas tax fund. Okay,
so it's not stimulus money.
No, it's not stimulus money.
Okay,
and this is one of the first things people need to understand, that people are very critical of federal spending, and so am I right now. I mean, it's just out of control. And there's a lot of things they're spending money on and simply putting it on some giant credit card in Washington, D.C. that our kids and grandkids are going to have to pay for eventually. But this was money from the gas tax, and which is basically a user fee. The more you drive, the more you pay.
Yeah, I mean, and people don't realize that every time you fill up, there's a certain amount of tax, $4 a gallon,
and it goes
to the feds.
It goes to Washington. It's in a big piggy bank there. So what we're doing when you take that money is taking money out of a piggy bank. We're not putting it on a credit card. Now the question was, is that the best use of that money? Because we were receiving the money to do a transportation exhibit at our Heritage Museum. And the question was, is that the best use of transportation money? And my answer was absolutely not. We ought to be able to use all that money in the transportation bank, so to speak, for roads and bridges.
Now, was this money a subset of something larger that you were actually working on road projects?
No, this is a pot of money, a subset of that pot of money that could be used only for 4 or 5 different things. It could be used for renovating train stations. It could be used for bike trails. It could be used for bike rider education, or it could be used for transportation museums. So of those choices, we chose to use it on our museum. And as you said, history is my hobby now. I used to be a history teacher. We have a very, very nice new heritage museum. And right now there's an exhibit on the German immigration to St. Charles County. And of course those exhibits are good for a certain period of time, and the next exhibit will be on transportation. And when we're finished with it, it'll be available to others to use. So,
how much?
But
money
my whole point was,
well, first of all, how much money are we talking about here?
On that grant?
Yeah,
$300,000.
Right.
And we have to pay 20% to get the 80%.
Okay.
So it's one of those matching things. And again, I'd rather take in a growing area like St. Charles, we've got tremendous needs for new roads. I'd rather take that money and apply it to some road project. But again, the people in Washington, D.C., whether it's Congress or the Transportation Department, have taken this money and kind of put it off limits for roads and said, you've got to use it for something else. So even though the vast majority of the constituents that I serve would rather see it used for roads, that's not an option. So my point to the gentleman interviewing me was he really needed to go talk to our congresspeople, our senators, or the bureaucrats at the Department of Transportation and tell them we'd like to get the money back that we send there, and we'd like to get it back for roads.
Yeah. I've done tons of programs here about transportation, and especially transportation infrastructure, so I'm pretty familiar with the issues that you're talking about here. But I just found that what really caught my attention was how you stood your ground. Normally, when Elliot Davis comes around, you see people cowering, running, hiding. Just last night I saw him going to talk to some members of the East St. Louis School Board about the fact that they're spending, $1.4 million on relatives.
Actually,
and
yeah,
salaries.
And I've heard about that one, and that's probably some good journalism.
But at least you stood your ground.
Well, you know what? You gotta.
Hey, I disagree with your position.
He doesn't show you all the interviews. Are you shocked to hear that? He doesn't show
mean all the stuff that goes on the floor? Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, and the time before that he was out because somebody was complaining about a job that a contractor under contract with the county had done, and I basically, he asked me about it. I said, we've checked with our legal staff. The taxpayers do not have to pay for this. Taxpayers are not going to pay for it, and I explained it like 3 or 4 times. Finally, I just put my arm around and said, now, Elliot, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it for the 7th time. Are you listening? And I said it again. Now, on this one, I went ahead and, he was suggesting, this wasn't a good use for transportation funds, and I agreed. But I said, now, Elliot, you're not one of these people who had a bad history teacher in 11th grade and you've hated history ever since, are you? And he said, he kind of laughed and said, no, I love history. I said, are you sure? But that stuff ends up on the cutting room floor. And,
yes. Right.
We
have to be impactful in television. It's been explained to me. Okay, full disclosure here. I have tried to have this show moved over to both to Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 5.
Yeah.
Literally, these people over there have looked at me and have said things like, you want to talk about ideas on our air? And that was the end of that. We're not going to talk about ideas. We want to talk about emotions and how people feel and, getting people riled up. And so coming over and trying to beat up on you. But luckily, apparently you're more difficult to beat up on.
I've got a good friend who's a journalist, and when I was first elected to this job, I said, I'm going to be so boring you won't want to write anything about me. But of course,
have you succeeded?
Not entirely, but yeah, people like controversy. You've got to have something to get their attention.
Well, let's talk about a controversy. Very recently, there was a controversy about a new congressional redistricting map for the state of Missouri. Some in St. Charles County had some questions about the maps that had been presented previously. What was the problem, and what was your position, and are you satisfied with the outcome that was recently passed and overridden over the governor's veto?
We're not. I personally am not. I don't know that the county really has a position on that, but personally, I'm not real happy with it. But of course, it's the result of a process, and nobody ever gets entirely what they want. What we wanted in St. Charles,
Senator. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, compromise, that's a bad word now. Yeah. You don't want to use it too often. But in St. Charles County, one of the things that they look at when you do redistricting, or that you're supposed to look at, is community of interest. Okay, and we feel like we have a community of interest in St. Charles County.
Define so people understand what you mean by the phrase.
A feeling that, that we have certain things in common. We have certain values that we share. We have certain goals we'd like to reach.
Like rural people have more in common with other rural people.
Exactly.
And urban people have more in common with
urban
people.
Rural, you got suburban. You've got maybe even differences between St. Charles County and West County and St. Louis, or North or South County. I mean, there are differences in those regions. So we just want it to be all in one district or another. We didn't care. We could be all in the second, or we could be all in this new third, because we want to be a big part of one district. In the past, and even now in the future, we're going to be a small part of 2 districts. And it just means I don't think that our interest as a community will be listened to quite as much as they would if we were a bigger part of a single district.
Are you indicating that St. Charles County's political power has been divided?
Well, you could argue we have more power, because now we have two people that are representing us. But yeah, I think most of the people I talked to, Republican and Democrat, would have preferred that we just be part of one district. Because right now there's a line going through on this proposed new map, or I guess it is the map now.
Yes.
On the new map.
Unless there's a court challenge,
yeah.
A successful court challenge.
Yeah. And on this new map, I mean, it goes through neighborhoods. It just makes no sense. It goes through cities, through neighborhoods, And people on one side of the street are in one district, and people on the other side are in the other. Now, that having been said, the bigger problem is just the whole process of redistricting. Because what both parties do is try to protect their incumbents. And the problem with that is they end up drawing districts that are safe for one party or the other. Okay? And because that's true, because they're safe districts, the representative from that congressional district ends up being whoever wins the primary.
Right.
And not always, but in most cases, you know,
St. Louis City is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, in most cases, the more conservative Republican wins the primary,
Right.
and the more liberal Democrat wins the primary, and then they're basically in, except now the people who are the extremes of both parties are the ones who end up going to Washington, D.C. and trying to work some things out. And as you can see over the last several years, that's been very difficult to do.
Mm-hmm. Hence your comment about compromise, which you said facetiously, but I detect that you actually meant something
and you
more
know,
deep. Go ahead, talk about that.
Well, we had former Senator Ted House, who's a judge now.
Mm-hmm.
He and I went into the legislature 22 years ago. We're good friends. He's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. And of course, we're celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
There were two gentlemen in St. Charles County at that time. One was Barton Bates, who was a Whig, and the other was Arnold Krekel, who was a Democrat. And they both left their parties and became Republicans and worked to save the Union. Now, as they worked to save the Union, it also became obvious they very much disagreed on the future of slavery. And Bates was for slow, gradual compensation to owners.
Was he the Whig or the Democrat?
He was the Whig that became a Republican, and he was a slaveholder, and he was for compensation and before emancipation. And Arnold Krekel was a real radical. I mean, he was for immediate emancipation, right to vote. In fact, he signed the ordinance freeing the slaves in Missouri. Mm-hmm. But the point here is that here's two people who were in different parties who saw that there was a threat here to the Union and put aside their differences and worked together to save the Union. At the same time, that doesn't mean they agreed on everything. Mm-hmm. And that's what people, I think, need to understand. There are certain issues. When you go to Jefferson City or Springfield or you go to Washington, D.C., there are certain issues you simply can't compromise. That's why we have elections and people go vote.
But what do you make of the fact that in Missouri, as you said, there's 34 senators, 26 of whom are of the same party, Republican, and they still can't seem to get organized to pass certain important issues?
That's human nature, and that's generally what happens when one party becomes so entrenched and has such a large majority. They start fighting each other. 22 years ago, when I went to Jefferson City, there were only 9 Republicans in the Missouri Senate, and the rest were Democrats. Now there's only 8 Democrats, and the rest are Republicans. So in 22 years, the tables have completely turned.
Right.
But yeah, and I was the Republican floor leader. When I went there was Senator Kinder and I were the 12th and 13th, and when I left, we had a tie, and 25 days after I became a judge, we had the majority. So I was sort of like Moses. I wandered in the desert for 40 years, but never saw the promised land.
But the promised land isn't so promising. That's my point. For a small example.
Yeah.
Okay. A couple years ago, you remember the deal with Ameren wanted to build an additional nuclear power plant at Callaway. And all they were asking for was, let us collect just the interest. That was all they wanted. Let's collect the interest on the debt while we're getting ready to build this thing. And the Senate just couldn't bring themselves to accomplish this. I mean, I talked with, after the fact, with Jane Cunningham, Eric Schmidt, and Jim Lemke. And, you know, it was like, well, I did not hear any clear delineation of why they couldn't take control of that and solve that problem, why it was more important to fight about it than it was to solve it.
And I wasn't there, but from what I've heard, there were substantial interests who were opposed to that. we already have, Missouri's lucky, we have some of the cheapest electrical power
Yes.
in the entire country.
Yes.
So it's not like, like it's a crisis. And there were some people who, some big users, industries and so forth, that were opposed to it. And I don't know
Don't they
exactly
recognize that they're going to 20, 30 years from now, assuming they're still in business, that they're going to need power, and that when you look at the curve, if we don't increase the volume of available electricity, that they'll be rationed, or that the price is going to go up significantly?
I think they think about those things, but do they also think about just the whole safety issues of nuclear power and what's happened since they decided not to do that?
Well, yes.
Now, everything I've heard is, we would never have those types of problems in a nuclear plant in Missouri, but with what happened in Japan. The purpose of a Senate, whether it's in Washington or Springfield or Jefferson City, is to slow down the train. And sometimes the best thing that the Senate does, or in any case, the best thing they do is to do nothing. Because they're elected every 6 years, so they have an opportunity to be there and gain some perspective.
The federal Senate.
Federal and a state, I think it's 4 years.
4 years, yeah.
The reps in all three, Missouri, Illinois, and federal, are elected every 2 years.
Right.
So they're going to go home every 2 years, and whatever the issue du jour is, they're going to be all hepped up about that, and they're going to want to come back and pass health care reform or whatever, and normally those things then go to the Senate, where they slow down and people start thinking, and people say, why don't we wait another year and see what happens? So in not all cases, but in most cases, the Senate is the conservative body that kind of forces people to stop, slow down. There's always next year. Better to not do it than to do it and make mistakes. So, that's I guess I'm just a conservative, and yeah, I believe there needs to be change. We have an economy that's constantly changing, so we can't just stand still. There needs to be changes.
Well, as a county executive, you have more day-to-day responsibilities, things that you can't put off, right? Things that you have to do right now. Did you find that transition from legislative, judiciary into executive jarring?
No. In the executive, and we have a charter county, so it's not like a lot of the cities or even the county governments.
Tell people what that means.
Well, the Missouri Constitution allows the people of a county to adopt a charter, and the charter that we adopted basically creates a separation of powers. So a lot of times, in the county commission or in city government, really the mayor or the presiding commissioner is just kind of one of the legislators. We have a county council that makes the rules, and we have an executive branch that actually enforces those and provides the services.
Right.
As an example, our legislature decides how much they want to spend on fixing potholes, but we decide on which potholes get fixed.
And who to send.
And who to send, and all those types of things. So, the really good thing is our council's really good. I mean, they ask tough questions at budget time. They ask tough questions every 2 weeks, every time we have a contract. I mean, they're constantly checking those things and trying to make sure we're doing the right thing and so forth and so on. But once we get beyond that, once they approve the contract or budget the money, then basically they let us do our job. And you don't have a lot of the interference that sometimes you get from a legislative branch when a mayor or someone's trying to run a city.
We got about 4 minutes left here. Time goes by fast. Are there issues from your area that you would like to discuss specifics?
Well, we've already spoken a lot about transportation.
Right.
And
that is a big issue there.
It's a big issue in St. Charles.
Yours is one of the fastest growing areas in Missouri, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and it has been for a long time.
Right.
And
so you've had to.
And
add
I
a lot
grew
of
up
roads.
in St. Charles, and except for 4 years in college, and I basically lived there in the St. Louis region. And it wasn't until I went to Jeff City as a legislator that I realized that growth was not normal, was not the kind of everyday occurrence in the rest of the state that it has been in my county. We're very lucky. But you go to Jefferson City, and you realize that you talk to colleagues who live in northern Missouri, which is losing population. People who raise their kids and send them off to college knowing they're probably never going to come back because there's no jobs there. And it's never going to get that bad here in the St. Louis area, but I think that's one of our real challenges here in the future. When you talk to economic development people, and they talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the region, and we have a lot of strengths, but the main weakness they talk about is attracting young professional people. Getting those people who come to school here to stay here. Getting our own children who go off to school somewhere else, getting them to come back. Yeah. Getting those kids from northern Missouri to come here instead of Kansas City or Chicago or Dallas. And I just think we probably need to do more to recruit those kids back, to keep them here, because
do we have business to keep them busy?
Well, it's a chicken and egg thing. We probably don't have enough business to attract them, but the businesses won't come here if we don't have the workforce. If you have a high-tech company and so forth, they know they can go to the Boston area or the Seattle area, and they're going
Charlotte,
to have
North Carolina.
Yeah. They're going to have X number of young professionals able to do the kind of jobs they want. And if we don't have the same workforce here, we're not going to be in the running.
Right.
So, there's a lot of talk about subsidies, and there's a lot of talk about what sort of investments we should make. We just need to continue to invest in education, and then we need to make sure the people we educate are here as part of our workforce.
Yeah. Well, I understand, and I've seen over the years, plans, and we're training people to do all this stuff, but unless you can actually land the people that have capital, that want to do something with that capital, all that workforce is not going to do any good. And we've got like about 30 seconds, so if you want to respond to that.
Well, I think we've got to keep working at it. We need to make sure the investments we make are in real jobs, not moving retail around and all of that. And
taking the Walmart, moving it from here down to there.
That's a whole nother show if you want me to come back.
Right. We will.
We'll do some. We need to be smart about how we invest.
Thank you very much for being with us today. It's been great.
Okay.
I've been speaking with Steve Ehlmann. He is the St. Charles County, Missouri County Executive. And we've been talking here a little bit about his history and what he's done. And for those of you who've not met him or heard about St. Charles County before, it's interesting. You ought to go there and just take a look. They have a wonderful riverside there. To the rest of you, we'll see you next week.